The shelter lay quiet beneath fresh winter snow, sunlight flashing off steel fences like cold fire. They called the dog Untamable, a wild German shepherd no one dared approach. Papers were signed. Time was running out. That morning, a Navy SEAL stepped through the gate, dressed in his working uniform, moving with the calm of a man who had survived worse than fear. He wasn't there to adopt. He wasn't there to argue. Inside the kennel, the dog slammed against metal, then suddenly froze. Ears pinned, breath slowed, eyes lifted, scanning the air like a battlefield. The SEAL stopped walking. He recognized that look. Not rage, not madness. A soldier trapped in a war that never ended. What happened next would defy protocol, ignite old scars, and force an entire city to choose between fear and mercy. Because some missions don't end after war. They begin when you refuse to walk away. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments below. Boise, Idaho wore winter-like armor. Overnight snow had packed itself into every curb and gutter, smoothing the city into something clean and deceptively calm. And now the morning sun struck that white surface and threw it back hard, bright enough to make eyes water, bright enough to make everything look holy even when it wasn't. The air had the sharp, dry bite that cut into lungs on the first breath and then dared a person to take another. Cars moved slow on slick streets, tires whispering over salt and ice. On the edge of town, where industrial buildings and low warehouses crouched against the foothills, Boise Animal Control sat like a squat concrete bunker surrounded by chain-link fencing that glittered with frost. It wasn't a place of warmth or second chances. It was a place of forms, deadlines, and decisions made with gloved hands. Inside that building, time didn't pass like it did anywhere else. It ticked with the sound of latches, keys, and doors that shut too final. Ryan Walker drove past it the way he'd trained himself to drive past anything that might ask something of him. He was 35, built lean and dense like a rope pulled tight, with shoulders that filled out a jacket without trying. His face had the hard geometry of a man who'd spent years squinting into sun and dust, angular jaw, high cheekbones, a thin scar that cut through one eyebrow like a comma in a sentence someone tried to end. His hair was clipped short in the way men cut it when they don't trust mirrors to tell the truth, and there was rough stubble along his jaw that never quite became a beard, as if even his whiskers knew better than to settle in. He wore a U.S. Navy working uniform, NWU style, like it was still his skin. The patterned fabric, the practical boots, the set of it all. People in Boise sometimes stared because it didn't match the ski jackets and knit hats of a winter town, but Ryan didn't dress for approval. He dressed for readiness. Readiness had kept him alive. Softness had never made it onto the list. He wasn't active duty anymore. Those papers were filed, those doors shut, yet he moved with the same clean economy, like a man still hearing orders in the back of his skull. He kept his truck tidy the way some people keep altars, and he kept his routine even tidier. This morning's routine was simple. Drive to the military surplus store across town, buy a few things he didn't technically need but liked to have, gloves, cord, a replacement buckle, and be back before Boise woke fully into the day. No detours, no stops, no problems to inherit. That was the promise he made to himself every day, and most days the world let him keep it. Then the sound hit his cab like a hammer, not a bark, not the thin yip of a scared kennel dog, but a deep percussive slam, metal on metal, followed by a raw, panicked roar that scraped up the spine. The noise cut through closed windows, cut through Ryan's practiced indifference, cut through whatever distance he'd built between himself and everything that bled. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. He should have kept driving. He knew that. His body knew it too, muscles already preparing to pass, to leave. But another slam followed, rhythmical, violent, like something trying to break out of an iron story. Ryan glanced toward the chain-link gate. In the sun glare, the yard looked almost peaceful, sparkling like sugar. It was a lie. Near a transport truck at the loading area, two men stood in chaos, their silhouettes sharp against the snow. One wore a county uniform, heavy jacket, badge patch, work gloves. He was youngish, early 30s maybe, thick through the chest, with a buzz cut and the flushed face of a man whose temper lived close to the surface. Blood darkened his sleeve in a spreading stain that looked almost black against the pale winter. He cradled his forearm, jaw clenched, eyes bright with pain and fury. This was Jake Turner, animal control officer, the kind who liked rules because rules gave him edges to hold when fear tried to flood in. A past incident had put that fear there, an attack years ago that left scars under fabric and in the mind, the sort of memory that woke at odd times and demanded payment. Next to him stood an older man in a thick coat, late 40s, with tired eyes, and the posture of someone who had once carried authority like a shield and now carried it like a burden. His hair was dark with gray at the temples, his mouth set in a straight line that meant he'd learned to keep emotions from showing on his face even when they were clawing to get out. This was Tom Hayes, the shelter director, former police captain, trained in calm the way Ryan was trained in motion. Tom's hands were raised, palms out, trying to lower the temperature of the moment, but the sound behind them refused to cool. The source of it, a German shepherd, was a blur of black and tan inside the transport kennel, a large body throwing itself against the gate with terrifying force, claws skittering, foam flecking the bars. The dog wasn't barking like a warning. It was screaming like an alarm. It lunged, hit metal with a sickening thud, spun, lunged again. Ryan could see the dog's paws, raw and bleeding at the nails, as if it had tried to dig through steel. In the bright winter sun, the sheen of its coat looked almost polished, beautiful in a tragic way, like a soldier's dress uniform dragged through mud. Tom said something Ryan couldn't hear through the truck glass. Jake's voice carried, sharp, shaking with adrenaline, words that tasted like verdict. "It's done. Put it down. I'm not handling that thing." Ryan pulled onto the shoulder without deciding. His truck engine idled, then, almost against his will, he killed it. Silence rushed in, and in that silence the kennel slam sounded even louder, each impact a punctuation mark. Ryan stepped out into the cold. The snow's brightness made the world feel exposed, like there was nowhere to hide a thought. Jake saw him and snapped, "Keep moving. This isn't a show." Tom looked at Ryan with the quick assessment of a man who'd once read danger for a living. Uniform, stance, eyes. Ryan didn't answer either of them. He looked at the dog, and the dog looked past them all. That's what made Ryan's chest go tight. The dog's eyes were wide, whites showing, pupils blown. Not the narrow focus of aggression, but the huge, drowning gaze of panic. Its ears were pinned flat to the skull. Its body trembled as if winter had gotten inside it. But the strangest part was the head. Between lunges, the muzzle snapped upward, scanning the roofline, scanning the empty blue skies, scanning the high corners that held nothing. The threat it feared wasn't in front of it, it was above. Ryan felt a cold hand close around his throat, not from the weather, but from memory. A different sun, a different skyline, a roofline that wasn't clean Idaho snow but baked mud brick and dust. The way a dog's head snapped up when it caught something the humans couldn't smell yet. The way a trained animal read the invisible. Ryan swallowed hard. "He's scanning," he murmured, more to himself than to them. The words sounded strange in the open air, like he hadn't used his voice in days. Jake spat into the snow and winced from the movement. "He's rabid," Jake snapped. "He bit me. That's all you need to know." Tom's eyes flicked from Ryan to the kennel and back. "He came in as an owner surrendered this morning," Tom said, voice controlled. "We don't have history. We don't have options. My staff won't go near him." The dog slammed again. Ryan's instincts shouted to leave, 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 because isolation was a habit and habits feel like safety. His foot took half a step back toward his truck. Then the dog froze for half a heartbeat, head lifted, nostrils flaring, as if listening for something that wasn't there. Ryan saw it so clearly he almost laughed at the cruel humor of it. The dog was fighting a war with no enemy visible, a soldier swinging at ghosts. And Ryan, who had spent years insisting he was done with war, was standing there recognizing a brother in arms made of fur and terror. Jake reached toward a catchpole leaning against the wall. The metal clinked and the dog exploded again. Tom's mouth tightened. "We can euthanize humanely," he said, the practiced phrase of a man who had had to say it too many times. "It may be the kindest thing." Ryan's jaw locked. "No," he said, and the word came out flat, not pleading, not dramatic, just a door slammed shut. Jake turned, incredulous. "What did you say?" Ryan kept his eyes on the kennel, not giving the dog the challenge of a direct stare, not giving Jake the satisfaction of attention. "He's not vicious," Ryan said. "He's terrified." Tom exhaled through his nose, skeptical but curious. You some kind of dog whisperer? Jake sneered, pain making him mean. Ryan finally turned his head slightly, enough to meet Tom's gaze. In the winter glare, Ryan's eyes looked pale and steady. I handled military dogs, he said. A long time. The phrase military dogs changed the air. It carried weight, like a rank spoken out loud. Tom's expression shifted from dismissal to calculation. Jake's scoff faltered, replaced by something like uncertainty, because uncertainty was what fear hated most. Even if that's true, Tom said carefully, I can't put a civilian in danger. I can't open that kennel. Insurance would... I'm not asking you to open it, Ryan cut in, voice calm but edged. Give me space. Give me time. Jake barked a laugh that sounded like it hurt. Time? He already drew blood. That's a death sentence. Ryan's mouth twitched, the smallest ghost of a humorless smile. In my world, he said, blood wasn't always a sentence. Sometimes it was a beginning. Tom stared at him, the way men stare when they sense a cliff edge, but don't yet see how far down it goes. Ryan drew a breath that stung his lungs and forced his next words out with the weight of a vow. Don't kill him, Ryan said. Give me 7 days. The dog slammed again, as if punctuating the request. For a heartbeat, even Jake fell quiet, the snow-bright yard holding a tense stillness. Tom's face softened for the length of a blink, sympathy maybe, or the old instinct of a cop who'd seen enough miracles to know they were rare but not impossible. Then reality returned like a stamp. Tom reached into his coat, pulled out a folded document, and held it up so Ryan could see the county letterhead. The paper looked ridiculous in that bright, clean morning, so small for something that could end a life. You don't have 7 days, Tom said, voice low, almost apologetic. You have 72 hours, orders already filed. And as if to mock them all, the German shepherd's head snapped up again, eyes wild, scanning the roofline, waiting for danger to fall from a sky that looked perfectly, cruelly clear. The yard of Boise Animal Control lay exposed beneath the winter sun, the snow packed hard and bright, every footprint etched sharply like evidence that refused to fade. The cold wind slid low across the concrete, clean and biting, carrying the faint smells of disinfectant, wet metal, and fear. Ryan Walker stood just inside the gate where Tom Hayes had left him, the folded euthanasia order still heavy in the director's coat pocket like an unspoken threat. Ryan did not ask to go inside the kennel. He did not ask for restraints, sedatives, or permission to touch the dog. He asked only for a chair. Not a plastic one, not something light or temporary, but a solid wooden stool, the kind that didn't squeak, didn't wobble, didn't announce itself when a man shifted his weight. Tom hesitated, his breath fogging in the air. Years as a police captain had trained him to trust procedure over instinct, but those same years had also taught him that the worst mistakes came from ignoring the quiet people who didn't speak unless they meant it. He nodded once and went inside. When he returned, he carried an old 3-legged milking stool, scarred with age, the wood darkened by decades of use. Ryan took it without a word. He placed it on the snow-dusted concrete several yards from the transport kennel, careful to angle it slightly away from the dog. Then he sat. He didn't face the kennel head-on. He turned his body just enough to offer a shoulder, a profile, non-threatening, unchallenging. From the inside pocket of his NWU jacket, he pulled out a battered notebook, its edges soft, its cover creased and faded. He opened it to a random page and lowered his eyes as if reading. The German shepherd reacted instantly. The dog launched itself at the metal gate with renewed fury, the sound echoing across the yard like a hammer striking an anvil. Foam sprayed from its mouth, claws shrieked against steel, and its growls rolled deep and primal, vibrating through the fence. Any other human would have flinched. Ryan did not. He did not look up. He did not tighten his shoulders or brace his legs. He breathed slowly, evenly, the way he had learned to breathe on long Overwatch nights when panic could get men killed. Inside the building, Sarah Miller stood frozen behind the glass of the clinic door. She was 26, tall and slender, with narrow shoulders that always looked slightly hunched, as if she were trying to make herself smaller in a world that rarely made space for gentleness. Her hair was light brown, pulled back into a practical ponytail that revealed a pale face dotted with faint freckles across the bridge of her nose. Long hours under fluorescent lights had left her skin soft and almost translucent, her eyes a tired green that carried too much empathy for this job and not enough armor. She hugged her clipboard to her chest as the dog hurled itself at the kennel again. "What is he doing?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "He's going to get himself killed." Tom stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw set. "No," he murmured, eyes narrowed. He's not ignoring the dog. He's letting the dog exhaust itself. Outside, the shepherd's rhythm began to falter. The lunges came faster, then sloppier. The barking broke apart into sharp, uneven bursts, no longer the solid wall of sound it had been. Each attack on the gate meant nothing. No shouting, no baton, no pole, no human fear feeding back into the animal's terror. Just a man in winter uniform, sitting quietly, turning a page. Ryan did not read the words. His eyes moved across the paper, but his attention was fully on the dog. The way its breathing hitched, the tremor in its hind legs, the subtle change in its posture as rage gave way to confusion. The dog lunged once more, then stopped short. It stood panting, chest heaving, saliva dripping from its jaws onto the concrete. Its ears twitched, its head tilted slightly. The human was still there, still calm, still not reacting. A low, frustrated whine slipped out of the dog's throat, thin and almost childlike, and then, slowly, it backed away from the gate and sat. The silence that followed was not peace. It was tense, coiled, like a wire drawn tight. Ryan turned another page. Inside, Sarah's breath caught. She had never seen anything like this. Most calming protocols involved movement, voice, treats, chemical restraint. This was something else entirely. This was endurance. Time stretched. The sun climbed higher, reflecting off the snow until the whole yard glowed harsh and unforgiving. Ryan sat for nearly an hour. When he finally closed the notebook, the sound was soft, deliberate. He stood, lifting the stool with steady hands, still not looking directly at the dog. The shepherd rose instantly, muscles taut, eyes locked on him. No barking, no charge, just attention. Ryan walked back toward the gate, boots crunching softly. Behind the glass, Sarah felt her heart pounding. "Don't leave," she thought, though she didn't know why she cared so much. Ryan stopped near Tom. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. His voice was low, unused, like a tool taken off a shelf after years of neglect. Tom studied him, weighing liability against something harder to measure. "Tomorrow," Tom echoed. Ryan nodded once and turned toward his truck. That was when it happened. The German shepherd lay down fully for the first time. Not a collapse, not a submission, but a deliberate lowering of its body, head resting on its paws, eyes never leaving the spot where the man had been sitting. The yard seemed to exhale. Sarah moved before she thought. She grabbed a thin manila folder from the intake desk, one she had pulled earlier out of sheer habit, because something about the dog's intake form hadn't sat right with her. She pushed through the door and jogged across the snow, her boots slipping slightly as she called out, "Wait, Ryan!" He turned, surprised to hear his name, from a stranger. Up close, Sarah saw the lines around his eyes, the way his gaze stayed calm even when startled. "I'm Sarah," she said quickly, holding out the folder with gloved hands. I was the intake tech this morning. I scanned the dog's microchip." Ryan took the folder, his fingers brushing the paper, and, "It's restricted," she said, swallowing. "Not civilian. It flagged military." Ryan opened the folder. He didn't need to read far. The seal on the page, the familiar insignia, hit him like cold water. For a moment, the brightness of the snow dulled, the sounds of the yard faded, and all he could hear was the distant echo of commands shouted in another place, another life. He closed the folder carefully. The German shepherd watched him, ears lifting just slightly, as if sensing the shift. Sarah hugged herself against the cold, suddenly unsure if she had just helped save a life, or dragged an old war back into the open. The administrative office of Boise Animal Control felt nothing like the yard outside. Here, the cold was held at bay by humming heaters and sealed windows, but the light was sharper, white-blue winter sun pouring through a wide pane of glass that framed the snow-covered yard like a frozen photograph. Every surface reflected it, metal filing cabinets, laminated countertops, the glass of framed certificates lining the wall. Ryan stood near the window, arms relaxed at his sides, his NWU jacket zipped halfway up, posture straight without effort. He looked out at the snow, but his attention was no longer on the yard. It was on the thin manila folder in his hands. Sarah Miller sat across from him at the desk, her shoulders slightly hunched, fingers interlaced as if bracing for something fragile to break. Up close, Ryan could see the faint circles beneath her eyes, the kind that came from long shifts and the quiet grief of choosing which animals could be saved and which could not. Her voice, when she spoke, was careful. The microchip didn't just flag military, she said. It pulled archived records. She slid a second document across the desk, this one printed on heavier paper, the ink darker, more formal. Ryan opened it. The name hit first. Ranger, short, solid, a name chosen by people who valued function over sentiment. His breath slowed. Beneath the name were identifiers: breed, German Shepherd, age estimated 6. Designation, military working dog. There was a photograph clipped to the corner, taken years earlier. Ranger stood alert beside a handler in desert light, coat dark and clean, ears forward, eyes bright with intelligence and readiness. Ryan's vision narrowed until the edges of the room seemed to fade. He knew that stance. He knew that look. It was the same posture burned into his memory from a different dog, a different war. For a moment, the snow outside the window dissolved into heat shimmer. White glare became sand and skiing. He smelled dust and diesel instead of disinfectant. Titan's face rose uninvited in his mind. Black mask, amber eyes, a scar along one ear from a job that had gone wrong and then right. Titan had been younger than Ranger, faster maybe, but the training lines were identical. Same posture, same focus, same way of standing slightly ahead, as if daring the world to try something. Ryan closed the folder too quickly. Sarah noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tightened around the paper. "You knew," she said softly. "Didn't you?" Ryan didn't answer. He turned his gaze back to the window, to the dog lying in the yard beyond the glass, his body now still but coiled, watching everything. "He was discharged 18 months ago," Sarah continued, her words steady even as her eyes flicked between Ryan and the file. "Behavioral issues listed. Hypervigilance, noise sensitivity, no aggression noted during service." She hesitated. "After discharge, he was adopted out. The adopter relinquished him this morning." Ryan finally spoke. "Why?" "The man said he was uncontrollable," Sarah replied. "That he'd tried everything." Her mouth tightened. "We see that phrase a lot." Ryan knew what that usually meant. He opened the folder again, scanning the intake notes. Bruising beneath the fur, old scars at the neck, calloused pads worn unevenly, not the marks of a wild dog, but of one handled roughly, inconsistently. "Who is the adopter?" Ryan asked. Sarah shook her head. "Private citizen, nothing flagged yet, but—" She trailed off, then met his eyes. "I don't think Ranger broke. I think he was broken." The door behind them opened, and Captain Tom Hayes stepped in, phone still in his hand. The lines around his eyes looked deeper than they had an hour ago, his mouth drawn tight. He shut the door carefully, as if trying to keep the world outside from hearing what came next. Tom set the phone down on the desk and leaned back against the cabinet, crossing his arms. "That was the county board," he said. "They've been watching this." His gaze flicked to the folder in Ryan's hands. "They don't care what Ranger used to be." Ryan turned to face him fully. Tom saw the change then, the way Ryan's calm had sharpened into something colder, more focused. "They care about risk," Tom continued, "and money. If that dog is still here after the weekend, they pull funding, not just for this case, for everything." Sarah's face drained of color. "That's 48 hours, she said. "They're asking you to kill him by Friday," Ryan said, not as a question. Tom didn't argue. "I'm asking you to understand the pressure," Tom replied. "This place runs on compliance." Ryan nodded once, slow. "So did my last unit," he said quietly. The words hung there, heavy with implication. Sarah watched the exchange, heart pounding. She had chosen this job because she believed systems could be bent toward mercy if the right people pushed hard enough. Watching these two men, one shaped by law, the other by war, she wondered which system would break first. Ryan looked back down at Ranger's photo. The desert sun in it felt cruel now. You said behavioral issues, he said to Sarah. What kind? Sarah flipped to another page. Classic MWD PTSD, she said. Sensitivity to overhead noise, hyperreactivity to sudden movement, fixation on high ground. She swallowed. The exact things that make them good at their jobs. Ryan's throat tightened. He remembered Titan freezing mid-stride, head snapping up just before the blast. Remembered the heat, the noise, the silence afterward. He remembered paperwork. He remembered leaving. He hadn't planned to tell anyone that part. Not here. Not now. I had a dog like him, Ryan said, more to the room than to them. Same training, same tells. Sarah leaned forward. What happened? The question was gentle, but it still cut. Ryan closed the folder again. He didn't come home, he said. It was the truth, carefully framed. He didn't say how, he didn't say why. He didn't say that after Titan, he'd walked away from the uniform, from the team, from the phone calls that followed. Some disappearances weren't accidents. They were choices. Tom watched him closely. Years as a captain had taught him to recognize men carrying weight they refused to set down. You still want to try? Tom asked. Ryan met his gaze. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint sound of a kennel door clanging somewhere down the hall. Outside, Ranger shifted, rising to his feet as if sensing the tension inside. Sarah followed Ryan's line of sight. If the board pulls funding, she said quietly, this place becomes a holding cell, not a shelter. Tom pushed off the cabinet. I'll buy you time where I can, he said, but I can't fight the board alone. Ryan nodded. He didn't expect anyone else to carry this. He picked up the folder and handed it back to Sarah. Tomorrow, he said. Same time. Sarah's eyes searched his face. What if 48 hours isn't enough? Ryan glanced once more toward the window, toward the dog who had been trained to give everything and then discarded for needing something in return. Then we'll make it count, he said. Tom's phone buzzed again on the desk. He looked at the screen, then at Ryan. They'll want an answer soon, he warned. Ryan was already turning toward the door. As he reached it, Ranger let out a single low sound, not a bark, not a growl, but something like a question. Ryan paused, hand on the handle, and for the briefest moment, his shoulders sagged, the soldier's mask slipping just enough to show the man underneath. Then he straightened and walked out into the bright, unforgiving snow, the weight of 48 hours settling onto his back like a pack he hadn't carried in years. The quarantine corridor was colder than the rest of the building, a long concrete vein lined with steel doors and reinforced fencing, designed less for comfort than containment. White fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too clean, flattening every shadow. Through the narrow safety windows, the yard outside glared with winter intensity. Snow reflecting sunlight so fiercely it felt almost hostile, as if the world itself were daring anyone inside to step out and face it. Ranger's Run sat at the far end, isolated from the others. He stood as Ryan approached, body angled, weight shifted forward, ears pinned back but not flat this time. His coat, black along the saddle and warm tan at the legs and chest, was thick and healthy despite everything else, the muscle beneath it still powerful, still disciplined. At 6 years old, Ranger was no pup, but he wasn't old either. An animal in the prime that should have been his safest years. His eyes tracked movement precisely, amber irises sharp with vigilance, yet dulled around the edges by exhaustion. Sarah Miller stood just outside the corridor door, clutching a legal pad against her chest. In the harsh light, she looked younger than she was, her pale skin almost luminous, freckles standing out like constellations across her nose. Her posture was tense but determined, chin lifted slightly as if she were bracing herself against doubt. She had spent most of the night reading policy manuals, cross-referencing county codes with federal animal transfer regulations until the words blurred. It was there, buried in subsection language written by someone who had never set foot in a shelter, the loophole. We don't have to make him safe for the public, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. We just have to make him manageable. Ryan leaned against the wall beside her, arms folded, his NWU sleeves creased with wear. He looked tired now, the edges of his calm fraying under the weight of time. Define manageable, he said. Sarah swallowed. Accepting a muzzle, walking on a lead from this run to a transport vehicle without lunging. She hesitated, then added, "That's it. If we can document that, I can legally transfer him to a sanctuary that specializes in former MWDs." Ryan nodded once. It was a mission profile, clear objectives, limited scope. Tom Hayes stood a few steps back, hands in his coat pockets, face drawn tight. He hated this part, the gray area where procedure bent and personal responsibility crept in. "If this goes wrong," he said, "I can't protect you." Ryan met his gaze. "You don't have to." They moved into position slowly. Ryan retrieved a long, lightweight pole from the supply rack, its surface worn smooth by years of use. At the end, he fixed a black basket muzzle, tactical, rigid, the kind designed for working dogs, not pets. Ranger's eyes locked onto it immediately. His body stiffened, a low vibration starting. In his chest, not quite a growl, but close. Sarah felt her breath hitch. She had seen that look before in dogs that had learned pain through repetition. Ryan crouched just outside the run, not facing Ranger directly. He rested the pole against his thigh, letting the muzzle hang loosely at the end. "Easy, soldier," he murmured, the corner of his mouth twitching with dry humor. "It's not a Halloween mask." The joke was thin, offered not to lighten the mood but to anchor himself. Slowly, deliberately, Ryan slid the pole forward until the muzzle rested on the concrete just inside the run, 6 inches past the threshold. He didn't push it closer. He didn't speak again. He just waited. Ranger reacted instantly. He darted backward, nails scraping against the floor, body pressed into the far corner. His breathing spiked, quick and shallow, sides heaving. His eyes never left the muzzle. This was not new fear. This was memory. Sarah's fingers curled into the pad of her notebook. She wanted to intervene, to say something, to do something, but she didn't move. Ryan stayed perfectly still. His silence was not absence. It was presence sharpened into restraint. Minutes stretched. The corridor hummed with electricity, the lights buzzing, the distant clang of a door somewhere else in the building. Ranger paced in tight circles, whining softly, then stopped. He sat. He stood. He stared at the muzzle, then flicked his gaze to Ryan's face, searching for cues, for threat, for permission. Ryan did not look back. He focused instead on Ranger's shoulders, the set of his spine, reading the language of tension easing by fractions. When Ranger finally crept forward, it was agonizingly slow. His head lowered, belly close to the floor, nose stretching out inch by inch until he could smell the rubber and metal. He flinched, recoiling slightly, but he didn't bolt. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. This was it, the thin line between failure and survival. Ryan waited until Ranger backed away again, then withdrew the pole just as slowly. The tension in Ranger's body dropped a notch, as if someone had loosened a band around his chest. Ryan didn't press the advantage. He set the pole down outside the run and stepped back. "That's enough for today," he said quietly. Tom exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. "You're stopping?" Ryan nodded. "Progress isn't about forcing the last inch. It's about not breaking the first one." Ranger watched him go, ears lifting slightly, confusion replacing fear. The silence that followed felt fragile, earned. Then it shattered. Tires screeched outside, sharp against ice. A heavy pickup skidded to a stop in the yard, engine growling, doors slammed. Ranger's head snapped up, muscles coiling. Ryan turned just as a group of men in county jackets strode toward the building, boots crunching on snow. At their center walked a tall, broad-shouldered man with a square jaw and close-cropped beard, his expression rigid with authority and something colder underneath. He carried a clipboard like a weapon. This was Deputy Mark Ellison, Enforcement Liaison for Animal Control, a man known for efficiency, not mercy. His past in corrections had taught him that hesitation invited chaos, and he despised uncertainty. He stopped at the entrance, eyes sweeping the corridor, landing on Ryan with open disdain. "We're here to execute an emergency order," Ellison said, voice clipped. He held up the paperwork. "Behavioral euthanasia, effective immediately." The words echoed off concrete walls like a sentence already served. Ranger let out a sharp bark, fear flaring anew, his body slamming once against the gate. Ryan stepped forward, placing himself between the run and the men, his posture calm but immovable. "He's in training," Ryan said evenly. Ellison snorted. "He's a liability." The muzzle lay on the floor between them, inches from the gate, a symbol of how close they were, and how far. The yard looked unreal under the winter sun, the kind of brightness that erased nuance and made every edge cruelly sharp. Snow covered the ground in an unbroken sheet, packed hard by boots and tires, reflecting light so intensely it felt staged, like a studio set built to expose everything. Breath rose in pale clouds, metal fences glittered, there was nowhere for fear to hide. Ryan Walker stood in front of the quarantine entrance, his NWU blending into the cold palette of the yard, posture straight, feet planted shoulder-width apart. He didn't move when the county truck rolled to a stop, nor when the doors opened with heavy finality. He only watched. Officer Jake Turner stepped out first. Up close, the years since his attack showed clearly. Jake was in his late 30s now, thick through the chest and shoulders, his body built like someone who once relied on physical strength to feel safe. His face was square and weathered, jaw clenched tight beneath a short, uneven beard that never quite hid the tension in his mouth. A pale scar curved along his forearm where a sleeve rode up, and the way he favored that arm told a story his paperwork never would. His eyes were the worst part. Dark, restless, always flicking, as if danger might lunge from any shadow. 5 years earlier, a dog had taken him down during a domestic seizure call, torn muscle and nerve before backup arrived. He'd healed enough to return to work, but the memory had lodged itself deep, reshaping his instincts. Since then, Jake trusted rules more than judgment and force more than patience. He carried a catchpole in one hand and his service weapon holstered but visible at his hip, every piece of gear a reassurance that he would not be helpless again. He saw Ranger through the chain link and felt his pulse spike. The German Shepherd stood rigid inside the run, body angled, ears pinned, eyes locked not on the weapon but on Jake's face. In Jake's mind, the dog blurred into the memory of teeth and pain and helplessness. He didn't see a former military working dog. He saw the animal that had almost ended his career, his life. Tom Hayes stepped forward quickly, palms open. "Jake," he said, voice firm but controlled, "this isn't a field call. We're handling it." Jake laughed, short and sharp, the sound brittle. "Handling it?" He nodded toward Ranger. "That thing already put one officer out. I'm not watching it happen again." Ryan shifted slightly, placing himself squarely between Jake and the kennel door. His expression didn't change, but something in his stillness drew the eye. "He's not a thing," Ryan said evenly. Jake's gaze snapped to him. "You don't get a vote," Jake shot back. "You're a civilian." Ryan didn't argue the title. "You're afraid," he said instead. The word landed hard in the cold air. Jake's face flushed. "I've earned that fear," he said. "And so is that dog." Ryan nodded once. "I was afraid too," he replied. "Every day. But fear isn't permission to kill." Tom felt the temperature of the moment spike. "Jake," he said, "put the pole down. We're in the middle of an evaluation." Jake ignored him. He took a step closer, boots crunching loudly. The sound echoed down the corridor behind the door, and Ranger flinched, muscles tightening. Jake's voice rose without him meaning it to, sharpened by adrenaline. "You see that?" he barked. "Unstable. You can't train that out." Ranger's reaction was immediate and violent. The dog lunged at the gate, slamming his weight against the metal, a roar tearing from his chest that reverberated through the fence. The sudden aggression fed Jake's certainty like fuel. His hand hovered near his holster, a reflex burned in by past terror. Ryan moved instantly, not toward the dog but toward Jake, placing a hand up, not touching, just signaling space. "Stop," Ryan said, his voice low but carrying. "Your voice is the trigger." Jake stared at him, chest heaving. "You don't tell me how to do my job." "I'm telling you how not to make it worse," Ryan said. Ranger hit the gate again, harder this time, claws scraping at the already weakened latch. Sarah Miller stood frozen near the doorway, her pale face drained of color, hands clenched at her sides. She had seen aggression, had documented it, but this was different. This was fear colliding with fear, amplifying itself into something uncontrollable. Tom stepped in front of Jake, his tone shifting from mediator to commander. "Jake," he said sharply, "stand down." Jake's jaw worked. "If that gate fails," he said, voice shaking now, "you'll all wish you'd listened to me." The sky answered him. A sharp crack split the air overhead, thunder, sudden and violent, ripping through the clear blue like artillery. The sound echoed off the buildings, rolling and concussive, completely out of place on such a bright morning. Ranger screamed. It wasn't a bark, it was a high, tearing sound pulled straight from his chest. He launched himself at the gate again and again, panic obliterating training, instinct overriding restraint. The metal latch, already stressed from days of abuse, shuddered. Ryan felt his stomach drop. Another thunderclap followed, louder, closer. The gate rattled violently. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. Tom shouted for everyone to back up. Jake's hand finally gripped his weapon, knuckles white, and then the latch gave way. With a shriek of metal, the gate burst open, swinging inward under Ranger's full weight. The dog stumbled forward into the corridor, a blur of fur and terror, free for the first time and utterly lost. Morning arrived sharp and unforgiving, the kind of winter dawn that felt scrubbed clean by the storm's violence. The sky over Boise was a hard, brilliant blue, the snow below it smooth and unbroken except where chaos had passed through. Every sound carried farther in the cold, doors opening, radios crackling, boots crunching, each noise magnified as if the world were holding its breath to see what damage the night had done. The quarantine corridor told the story before anyone spoke. The gate to Ranger's Run hung crooked, metal twisted, the latch torn away like a bone snapped at the joint. Muddy paw prints, wide, splayed, frantic, cut a dark path across the concrete and out toward the service exit. Tom Hayes stood just inside the doorway, coat unbuttoned, hair uncombed, the weight of a sleepless night etched deep into the lines around his eyes. He had seen escapes before, cats slipping through vents, dogs bolting past open doors, but never like this. Not with this much force, not with this much fear. Officer Jake Turner was already on his radio, pacing the yard in tight circles. In the clean morning light, he looked older than he had the day before, the set of his shoulders rigid, jaw clenched so hard the muscles trembled. The night had stripped away his certainty and left only dread. "All units be advised," he said into the mic, voice clipped and official, clinging to protocol like a life raft. "Escaped German Shepherd, former military working dog, high risk, potentially aggressive, last seen exiting Boise Animal Control at approximately 2300 hours. Initiate containment." The words came easily. The fear underneath did not. Jake's eyes kept flicking toward the tree line beyond the lot, as if expecting the dog to appear there at any moment, teeth bared, a nightmare given shape. Sarah Miller stood a few steps away, her arms wrapped around herself despite the insulated jacket. In the daylight, she looked painfully young, tall and slender, hair pulled into a loose ponytail that had begun to unravel, pale skin flushed pink from the cold. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not just from exhaustion, but from the knowledge settling heavy in her chest. This was her fault, in a way. She had believed in a loophole, in time, in patience. She had believed the system could bend. Now Ranger was gone, loose in a city that would not forgive them if fear turned into headlines. Her phone slipped in her gloved hand as she dialed Ryan. It rang once, twice. When he answered, his voice was already alert, the haze of sleep burned away by instinct. "He's gone," Sarah said, the words tumbling over each other. "The storm, he broke the gate. Jake's calling it in. They're saying he's dangerous. Ryan, they're going to hunt him." Ryan was on his feet before she finished speaking. The cabin he rented on the edge of town was cold and sparse, but his NWU lay folded and ready. He pulled it on with practiced efficiency, boots laced tight, movements precise. The mirror caught his reflection for half a second. Hard eyes, set jaw, the ghost of a man who had done this before. "Where?" he asked. "Out the service exit," Sarah replied, "toward the old access road." Ryan didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." He was in his truck moments later, engine roaring to life, tires biting into ice. The city blurred past as he drove, every sense tuned high. This wasn't panic, it was focus, the kind that came when a mission snapped into place and everything extraneous fell away. Ranger wouldn't run randomly. A trained dog in full panic still followed patterns burned into muscle and bone, away from noise, away from crowds, toward elevation, toward vantage, toward somewhere defensible, high ground. Ryan followed the logic as naturally as breathing. He reached the edge of the city just as the sun crested higher, turning the snowfields into blinding sheets of white. He slowed near a narrow access road that skirted the outskirts, half residential, half forgotten industrial sprawl. He pulled over and stepped out, crouching to study the ground. The tracks were unmistakable. Long strides, uneven spacing, toes digging deep into the snow where Ranger had slipped and recovered, slipped and driven on. The marks told a story of speed and desperation, not pursuit. "Easy, soldier," Ryan murmured to the empty air, the words a habit that soothed him as much as it ever had a dog. He followed the trail on foot now, moving with care, reading the signs the way he'd been taught to read dirt and dust and crushed grass. The tracks angled toward a stand of pines that bordered an abandoned industrial zone, a place left behind when the city grew in a different direction. Rusted chain-link fencing sagged under the weight of ice. Broken concrete slabs jutted from the ground like bones. Beyond them, squat warehouse structures crouched in the snow, windows dark, roofs patched and uneven. This was the kind of place a frightened animal would choose. Quiet, elevated, empty. Ryan felt his pulse quicken, not with fear but with urgency. He moved around the perimeter, careful to announce himself with slow, deliberate steps. "Ranger," he called softly, letting his voice carry without echoing. "It's Ryan." There was no answer. The tracks led straight toward the largest warehouse, a long, low building with a corrugated metal exterior and a loading dock half collapsed under the weight of years. Ryan crouched again, heart sinking as he noticed something new. On the pristine snow, just off the main trail of paw prints, was a smear of red. Blood. Fresh enough that it hadn't frozen solid yet, dark against the white. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. Injury changed everything. An injured dog would be slower, more defensive, more unpredictable. It would also be in pain, which meant fear layered on fear. He rose slowly, scanning the area. The warehouse door stood ajar, one hinge torn loose, leaving a narrow gap that yawned black against the brightness outside. The tracks led straight to it. Ryan's hand tightened into a fist at his side. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't reach for anything except his voice. "Ranger," he called again, softer now. "I know you're scared." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of cold metal and old oil. Somewhere inside the warehouse, something shifted, a scrape, faint but unmistakable. Ryan took a careful step forward, eyes on the darkness beyond the door. Whatever waited inside, wounded and cornered, had already decided this place was its last stand. The abandoned warehouse crouched beneath the winter sun like a thing that had chosen to be forgotten. Snow lay thick along its corrugated metal sides, bright and clean where the light struck it, but the building itself absorbed warmth poorly, exhaling cold through every crack and seam. Inside, daylight filtered through gaps in the roof where panels had torn loose years ago, casting pale shafts across dust and rust. The air smelled of old oil, wet iron, and something sharper. Blood. Ryan Walker stepped through the half-open door slowly, boots finding purchase on concrete slick with ice. He let the door rest open behind him, refusing to trap himself or the dog with sudden noise. His shoulders were relaxed, his hands empty. He didn't announce authority. He announced presence. "Ranger," he said softly, letting the word float ahead of him. The sound carried strangely in the vast space, echoing and dissolving among steel beams and hanging chains. From deeper inside came a low, ragged growl, no longer explosive, just raw and warning. Ryan followed the sound toward the back, where the floor dipped unevenly. There, beneath a collapsed shelving unit and twisted rebar, Ranger lay trapped. One hind leg was pinned at an unnatural angle, caught between bent metal and a slab of concrete that had shifted under his weight. The German shepherd's coat was matted with blood and grime, the black saddle dulled by dust, the tan fur along his legs darkened where it had soaked up pain. His chest heaved with every breath, ribs visible beneath fur drawn tight by fear. At 6 years old, Ranger still carried the mass and power of a working dog, but in this position he looked smaller, diminished by injury and the long night that had driven him here. His eyes flashed as Ryan approached, whites showing, teeth bared not in challenge but in reflex. Ryan stopped well out of reach and sat down on the cold concrete, lowering himself slowly until his back rested against a support beam. The move cost him. His joints protested, the chill bit through his uniform, but he didn't flinch. He kept his gaze low, angled away, the posture of someone who understood how easily pressure could turn into threat. "I'm not here to make you do anything," he said quietly. "I'm here because you ran, and I know what that feels like." Ranger's growl faltered, turning into a hoarse whine. His ears twitched, tracking the cadence of Ryan's voice. Ryan breathed out slowly, deliberately. "I had a partner once," he continued. "His name was Titan." The name tasted like rust and salt in his mouth. He hadn't spoken it aloud in years. "He was faster than you, louder too, thought the world was a puzzle meant to be solved." Ryan's hands curled loosely in his lap. "He didn't come home." Ranger's breathing slowed by a fraction. Ryan stared at the floor between them, at the dark stain spreading there. "After that, I disappeared," he said. "Left my team. Left the calls unanswered. Told myself it was because I was done with war." His jaw tightened. "Truth is, I was done with guilt. I didn't want to hear it breathe." Ranger shifted, a sharp yelp tearing from his throat as the trapped leg moved. Ryan froze instantly. "Easy," he murmured. "I see it. I won't touch you yet." He waited until the dog's breathing steadied again. "You're not broken," Ryan said. "You're hurt. There's a difference." The words weren't a command. They were a confession offered up as proof of understanding. Ranger's head lowered, the snarl fading. He watched Ryan with a focus that went beyond fear, searching for something familiar. The tone, the rhythm, the steadiness. Ryan leaned forward just enough to be seen, not enough to threaten. "I didn't save Titan," he said. "I ran from what that meant, and I won't do that again." Silence settled, thick and fragile. Then, slowly, Ranger did something Ryan hadn't expected. He dragged himself forward the few inches his trapped leg allowed and pressed his forehead into Ryan's chest, hard, as if anchoring himself to something solid. The contact knocked the breath from Ryan's lungs. He closed his eyes, one hand lifting instinctively before stopping himself, hovering until he was sure the dog wouldn't flinch. Ranger stayed. Two survivors, recognizing each other without language. Ryan swallowed past the tightness in his throat and moved carefully. He slid off his jacket, folding it into a makeshift pad. Inch by inch, he wedged it beneath Ranger's pinned leg to protect the skin before testing the debris. The metal groaned as he shifted it, every sound amplified. Ranger whimpered but didn't snap. Ryan gritted his teeth and pushed harder, muscles straining, breath coming fast. The slab shifted enough for the leg to slide free. Ranger collapsed onto his side, exhausted, trembling, but no longer trapped. Ryan exhaled a shaky laugh that bordered on a sob. "There we go," he whispered. "That's it." He supported Ranger as the dog struggled to stand, looping his arm under the chest, bearing the weight with a grunt. Step by step, they moved toward the light spilling in from the door. Outside, the snow was blinding after the dim warehouse. Ryan paused at the threshold, letting Ranger adjust, letting the world come back slowly. That was when he heard voices. Far off, carried by the cold air. Orders, boots on snow, engines idling. Jake Turner and his team were close now, the hunt tightening. Ryan angled his body protectively, guiding Ranger into the open yard beyond the warehouse. He scanned the tree line and stopped. A figure stood there, motionless, half-shadowed by the pines. The person was bundled in a heavy coat, hood pulled low, face obscured, broad-shouldered, tall enough to be imposing even at a distance. The figure didn't raise a weapon, didn't move closer, just watched. Ryan felt Ranger stiffen beside him. The stranger took one step forward and spoke, voice flat, certain, "That dog is mine." The shelter looked reborn under the winter sun. Overnight, the storm's wreckage had been cleared, and fresh snow lay smooth across the yard, reflecting light so brightly it softened even the hard edges of chain link and concrete. The air was crisp, clean, and still, as if the city itself were holding space for a decision that would echo far beyond this place. Ryan Walker stood near the quarantine wing in his NWU, jacket zipped against the cold, posture calm but ready. Ranger leaned lightly into his leg, weight supported by a temporary wrap that held his injured limb steady. The German shepherd's coat had been brushed clean, the black and tan pattern once again sharp and dignified, though the stiffness in his stance betrayed pain he was choosing to endure. His ears flicked at distant sounds, but his breathing stayed measured. He was present, At the edge of the yard, the stranger from the forest reappeared in full daylight, and the truth arrived with him. He was a broad man in his 40s with a thick neck and heavy shoulders, the kind built by years of physical labor and short tempers. His beard was unkempt, streaked with gray, his eyes small and calculating beneath the brim of a pulled-down cap. He wore a bulky coat stained at the cuffs, boots scuffed from hard use. His name was revealed quickly by Tom Hayes as he stepped forward, phone already in hand. Evan Brooks, the former adopter. Evan's voice carried an easy entitlement, the tone of someone used to claiming ownership through volume rather than proof. "That dog's mine," he said again, louder now, glancing from Ryan to Ranger as if appraising damaged property. "I'm here to take him and finish this." Ranger's body tensed, a low tremor passing through his frame, but he didn't lunge. Ryan shifted just enough to block Evan's line of sight. Tom's face hardened. Years as a police captain rose to the surface. His voice took on steel. "You'll step back," Tom said. "I've called this in." Evan scoffed, but the sound faltered when he noticed Jake Turner standing off to the side, radio clipped to his vest, eyes watchful. Sarah Miller emerged from the building carrying a small camera mounted on a stabilizer, her hands steady despite the stakes. In the bright light, she looked resolute, tall, slim, hair tied back neatly, pale face set with purpose. "We're documenting a behavioral assessment," she said, voice clear. "You don't get to interfere." Evan took a half step forward anyway, anger flashing. Before anyone could escalate, the distant wail of a siren cut through the air. Tom exhaled, tension easing just a fraction. Evan's shoulders slumped with a scowl as he was escorted away by arriving officers, his protests fading into the cold. Silence returned, fragile but real. Sarah raised the camera. "Whenever you're ready," she said. Ryan nodded. He knelt briefly to Ranger's level, his voice low and steady. "Same as before," he murmured. "Nothing new?" He lifted the muzzle. Black, clean, waiting. Ranger's nostrils flared. His body shook, a tremor that traveled from shoulders to tail, but he didn't retreat. He leaned forward, sniffed, then allowed Ryan to guide the muzzle gently into place. No snap, no bark, just a long breath released. Sarah's camera captured it all. Next came the lead. Ryan clipped it on, slack intentionally loose, signaling trust. "Walk with me," he said, and took a single step. Ranger followed. The snow crunched softly beneath their feet as they crossed the yard toward the transport vehicle. Ranger limped but did not pull. His head stayed level, eyes forward, ears alert but not pinned. The lead hung in a gentle curve between them. Jake watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. When Ranger paused, favoring his injured leg, Jake surprised everyone by stepping forward with a medical kit. He crouched carefully, movements slow, professional. His hands trembled only slightly as he reinforced the wrap, tightening it just enough to support without pain. He didn't speak. He didn't look at Ryan. But when he stood, he met Ranger's eyes for a brief second and nodded. Something like peace crossed his face. The camera kept rolling. The walk ended without incident. Sarah lowered the camera, tears bright in her eyes. "That's it," she whispered. Tom signed the transfer paperwork with a steady hand, the final signature landing before the deadline like a held breath finally released. The sanctuary van arrived shortly after, white and clean against the snow. Ryan walked Ranger to the door. He removed the lead and rested a hand briefly against the dog's shoulder. "You did good," he said. Ranger turned his head, amber eyes meeting Ryan's. His tail moved once, slow, deliberate, sure. Then he stepped inside. The door closed gently. As the van pulled away, Ryan stood in the bright winter light, hands at his sides, feeling the unfamiliar weight of stillness without regret. Sarah joined him, then Tom. Jake lingered back, watching the road. Ryan didn't look toward the mountains this time. He looked at the shelter, at the people, at the place he had chosen not to leave. In the glare of snow and sun, he understood that home was not where he hid, it was where he stayed. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire. They arrive quietly. Through patience, through mercy, through the courage to stay when running would be easier. In this story, no angel descended from the sky, no voice spoke from the clouds. Yet grace was present in the steady voice that calmed a broken dog, in the trembling hands that chose healing over fear, and in the moment a man stopped running from his past and chose responsibility instead. Many people believe miracles must break the laws of nature, but often God works through them. Through ordinary people who decide to love when it costs them something. Through second chances given to those the world has already written off. Through pain transformed into purpose. In everyday life, we meet rangers all the time, wounded souls, frightened hearts, people acting out of fear rather than evil. And sometimes, we are ranger. Other times, we are the one being called to kneel in the cold and say, "I'm not here to hurt you." If this story moved you, take a moment today to choose patience over anger, mercy over judgment, and courage over silence. Share this story with someone who may be struggling. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Your words matter more than you think. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of hope, healing, and second chances. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you in every quiet battle you face. And may you never forget, sometimes the miracle isn't what God fixes, it's who He asks us to become.